really matters? That might be the most important question you can ask. So let's talk about it. Welcome to What Really Matters podcast, Everyday Spirituality with Karen Wyatt. Thanks for joining me here again today. I have been sharing a series of episodes. In fact, this is number 6 in this series about a trip through Italy that I took when I was dealing with some very intense grief over a patient of mine who died the day we left on our trip to Italy, and old grief from my father's suicide death that happened to come up at that same time. Since this is part 6, I recommend that you go back to the very beginning and listen to these episodes in order, because I can't possibly summarize for you everything that's already been discussed, but it's worth your while to listen to each one, because each one of these episodes kind of builds upon the previous one. So I encourage you to go back and start with part 1. For today's episode, our journey through Italy takes us to the Cinque Terre region of Italy, which is along the western coast, the coast of the Ligurian Sea, and more in northern Italy. And it's just an amazing, stunningly beautiful, spectacular piece of geography, something I've never seen before. It's just a 6-mile stretch along the Ligurian Sea, but there are 5 villages. Cinque Terre means the 5 lands, and there are 5 different villages that each fill up a ravine, or in the case of one of them, Cornelia in the middle is on a hilltop overlooking the ocean. And these are tiny communities, medieval communities that are historically connected only by sea and by hiking trail. But nowadays there's a train that connects them, and also highways, so people can drive back and forth, and you can take a train to get there. But in the old days, these were very remote villages. And in fact, each village, even today, has its own distinct dialect and heritage, because while they were close geographically, the hiking from one village to another was somewhat difficult, up and down hills, over rocks, and a rather treacherous trail. So the villages remained separate in those earlier days of history. Each village had a castle at the top on a hillside, and so the villages were started by the presence of the castle being there, and then the peasants created the village down below, spilling down the ravine as it worked out in the end over time. And the villagers were often plagued by pirates who would come up the sea and land on their beaches or piers, and then would loot and maraud and kill and rape the villagers. So they would run up the hill to the castle and seek refuge inside the walls of the castle. There were also a series of watchtowers along the coastline, and you can see from one to another when one area would spot pirates coming, they would burn a fire in the watchtower, and the guard at the next watchtower would see it and build another fire so the smoke would rise, and they would signal each other all along the coast that there was danger coming. And that's how these communities in this area work together to try to help protect one another from the ravages of the sea pirates who would come by. It's a really fascinating history, but such an amazing, incredible place. As I said, it's somewhat isolated, but unfortunately now it's rather overrun with tourists, because the word got out a long time ago about how beautiful it is. And a lot of people take the trouble to get there to experience this amazing place. And yet when you're there, even though there are a lot of tourists, it's so quiet and peaceful and relaxing compared with being in Rome or Florence, one of the big cities. A lot of noise and traffic and just a more hectic, frantic feeling. These villages of Cinque Terre are are rather still and quiet and calm, and you feel as if you've stepped back in time when you're there. So we'd heard about Cinque Terre from other people who had traveled there, and that was one of the things I was most looking forward to on this trip, to be able to visit these 5 villages. We traveled there from Florence by train, but it turns out the stop where we were supposed to change trains to get to the Cinque Terre train, we actually got off one stop early. We didn't realize the little town we were stopped at had 2 different train stations, so we got off at the wrong station a little early, and we ended up having to wait a few hours before another train came by that could take us to the proper station. So our schedule got mixed up because of that little mistake. Things like this happen all the time, especially when you're traveling in a country like Italy with a lot of rural areas and small towns. And even in a number of our journeys, we found that even though we had the train schedule before us and we knew exactly when the train was supposed to arrive to pick us up, and we were there at the right time, we would get there to say, oh no, the train's been canceled today. We're not having a train today. That's happened to us a couple of times in Italy. And so it's just part of the pace of travel that you have to get used to. It was our first trip there. We weren't quite prepared for that, but it was an amazing lesson that we learned. And I would say on this piece of the journey through Cinque Terre is where we really fully learned to be present in the moment, and no matter what else is happening, to find a way to savor everything and just pay attention and just be there. So again, these 5 villages of Cinque Terre, they don't have any famous sites or museums, or historical landmarks to see. It's just, as I said, like stepping back in time and viewing these little fishing villages, what life is like there now, even though tourism has changed it a great deal. But it's really obvious and plain to see how these villages began and grew, and how people have lived and for the most part still live in these communities. So we finally arrived in the Cinque Terre region by train, and we came to the first village, which is the southernmost village, Rio Maggiore. It is the name of that village. So we got to pass through by train, stop there, let off some passengers and pick up new ones. And then the next stop was Manarola. That's the second village on the way. The third is Cornelia. That's the middle village, and it's built up on a hilltop. Rio Maggiore and Manarola are both built in ravines that kind of cascade down to the sea and down to a beach. Cornelia is built on a hilltop, so it's surrounded by cliffs. The fourth village is Vernazza, which is very picturesque and very lovely. But we were staying in the fifth village, Monterosso al Mare. And Monterosso has an old town and a new town. And the new town has more roads and traffic. The old town is very medieval, has twisting, narrow little streets. It has lots of archways you can walk under. Just incredible sights, cobbled streets, and no transportation, no cars at all in the old town. And again, spilling down the ravine to the beach. And lovely pastel buildings, some of them crumbling, lots of them, again, with archways, with upper decks and patios with flowers and bougainvilleas spilling over them. Just so colorful and so picturesque. And lots of little shops and lots of restaurants with outdoor seating and tiny, tiny little places. So we arrived to go to our hotel, which we had to walk to up a lot of stairs and a lot of steep paths uphill, because our hotel was situated higher up on the hill, which actually was an amazing location. The view was so stunning from there. But after our day of a missed train and a long train ride, we were a little tired. So it was an effort to drag our suitcases uphill and up steps to get to our hotel. But once we got there, we walked into this gorgeous small building. The hotel had only 16 rooms in it, but the lobby area was wide open, full of glass, and walked out to a big patio that was filled with flowers. It was so light and beautiful and lovely. And the hosts, who are a married couple, the husband is the son of the original owner of that hotel, and they have now taken it over and are running it. And they were so sweet and so kind. We felt instantly like, oh, we're at home. We felt like they were part of our family. They gave us each a glass of wine to take back to our room and invited us to just rest and be comfortable. We got to our room and found that it had its own patio that adjoined the garden for the hotel. On a hillside, it was a terraced garden, but we could walk out on our patio and sit there, and there was a gate into the garden where they're growing all kinds of beautiful flowers and herbs. It had the most amazing smell. And surrounding the garden was a little orchard with lemon trees and olive trees. And these were all on the property of the hotel. So they grew their own herbs, they picked the lemons, and harvested the olives from their trees. And it was just astounding. This was outside our room. This was like our own private little orchard and garden that we could go sit in during the day. And so this entire portion of our trip was really about connecting with nature and feeling the power of nature to heal grief. Because there wasn't a lot of sightseeing to do, there was plenty of time to sit outside on the little chairs at the little wrought iron table in the garden and just bathe in the scent of lemons and thyme and feel like the leathery leaves of the olive trees, to listen to the birds singing. We were drinking the glasses of wine that the owners always provided to us as we sat out in our little garden, and then looking out at the splendor of the Ligurian Sea. It was so magical and so magnificent, but also so healing and peaceful to be able to spend those hours in nature. And in addition to that, we had planned the next day to do the hike between the 5 villages. So probably about a 5-hour hike in total to go from our village, number 5 village, all the way down to number 1, Rio Maggiore. But that was on our schedule, and we were planning to hike all the way down and then take a ferry boat back up to our village. So the next day was more of a feast in nature, just incredible. We were hiking up very old stone steps, sometimes walking up the terraces that farmers have been using for centuries in that area to grow, again, olives and lemons and food for themselves. And so we were walking up the old stone steps next to stone fences and gates all through this farming land. Other areas we were scrambling over rocks, sometimes walking up wooden stairs, sometimes bridges. But the scenery along the walk was so gorgeous and stunning, always looking out at the Ligurian Sea to our right, and then looking uphill at even more terraces and more farming going all the way uphill. So it was a challenging hike, but so incredible. I had planned for us a little guide on the hike to each one of the villages that we would arrive at. So in Vernazza, we went to a little pastry shop called Il Pirata, which means the pirate, and had pastry and coffee in the morning. So in each of the villages along the way, there were a few things to see. We did a brief little tour of the village and usually stopped somewhere for some kind of a snack, for water or coffee, or just to rest our feet a little bit along the way. So we got a feel for all 5 of the villages on this hike. It was amazing. And when we got to the last village, Rio Maggiore, that's where we knew we had, there was a ferry boat that we could grab to take back to our village. And before we went into the village, we decided to stop because there was this amazing restaurant and bar on the trail up on top of a cliff with an incredible view, and it was an outdoor seating area. And so we were able to sit right on the edge looking over the water, and we had appetizers and had a glass of wine, and we were just like enjoying ourselves so much when we looked down and saw the ferry boat arriving at the port on the other side of the village, on the other side of the ravine. And we realized, oh wait, that's our ferry boat that we're supposed to catch. And we ended up having to run through that village and over rocks and up and down the little trail and down out onto the coastline and the pier. And we just barely made it. They were just getting ready to pull up the little boardwalk for the ferry when we got there, breathless, and were able to get on our boat and make it back. But that was a fun adventure for us. And taking the boat back was also amazing because we got to see the villages from the oceanside view. So it was incredible. They looked entirely different looking at them from the ocean, where we had been looking down on them from the hiking trail up above. And so we got an entirely new perspective on the villages. We could also see the watchtowers where they used to build fires to send smoke signals to one another. You could see the entire hillside up above and see where some of the villages still have ruined castles up above, and we could view those and then also get a good look at the terraced farming going on up above the villages as well. So it was amazing. And again, being immersed in nature for the entire day and just feeling this incredible connection. It was so soothing and so healing. But one thing I forgot to mention, the last section of the trail between Manarola and Rio Maggiore there's a wide open part of the trail that's down by near the water. And so it's a cliff side along the edge of a cliff, but it's near the water. And it's so wide, you can wheel a stroller on it. It's very easy walking. That's the easiest part of the entire trail. And it's called Via dell'Amore, the path of love. And apparently that path was built, I think, after World War II, and it was the first time the villagers from Manarola and Rio Maggiore were able to get back and forth easily between their two villages. And so apparently there were some couples that formed from the two villages that kind of united them. And when the Via dell'Amore was first built, one couple got married on the path in between their two villages. And so it's a really sweet area just historically to hear about that and to hear about the path of love. It is lined with some fences that have padlocks on them, and you've probably heard of that custom. It's in lots of places where two lovers come with a padlock and they lock it together onto the fence and throw the keys into the water as a sign that they will stay together forever. Lots and lots of those padlocks and sometimes ribbons tied along the fence. And it's really lovely. You get a a feel for all the lovers that have met on that path in between their villages. So back in Monterosso al Mare, I was searching for just the right place for my novena, and this was the 5th novena. And I really realized this novena was about being present in the moment and being able to carry sorrow and grief while still savoring and loving and enjoying everything the moment has to offer. And that became very clear to me. As I said, this being in this place was a delight for the senses. And I, for a moment, thought, is it okay that I'm enjoying this so much when I'm also grieving? Does that make sense? But I realized there, of course it does, because that is the only way that you can survive living in a place like this that is so harsh, like hanging above the sea, with story after story of shipwrecks and fishermen being lost at sea, of invaders killing the entire population, of war taking place there. In fact, in Monterosso, there's also a German pillbox that was used in World War II to spy out at the sea and watch for Allied ships and submarines. And so this area, it's a challenging place to live. People have to walk up and down cobbled streets day after day and deal with suffering and difficulty and pain every day. And yet there is such beauty, such vitality, such a vibrancy present in the nature that it clearly sustains you to be there and to go through whatever is required to live in this isolated, small place. As I walked around Monterosso al Mare, I found the Church of St. John the Baptist, Chiesa di San Giovanni Battista, which inside had a high water mark from the 1966 flood, which is when the flood happened in Florence that I talked about when I was in Florence. And I didn't realize that Monterosso had also been affected by that flood, and the floodwaters brought massive amounts of mud through the ravine in the center of town, and also did a lot of damage here in this small town. So that mark was present on the wall of the Church of St. John the Baptist. When I left that church, I looked just across the little square, and there was another church. And it was the Oratory of the Dead was the name of it, which immediately, of course, drew my attention. So I went to look at this small church, which had horizontal stripes of black and white marble on its facade, and it was much smaller. And I learned that it is the home of the Brotherhood of Death and Prayer, and that's the sign that's over the door. And there's also a skull and crossbones and an hourglass over the door of the church. And I was fascinated to see this depiction of death on a church. Inside, it's a lovely church, but everywhere, all of the decor is skeletons or skulls, crossbones again. And I had just never seen such a thing in any church I had ever been in. It was fascinating to me. And I was very curious about, what is this? I didn't understand. Is this actually Christian? Is this satanic or something? I didn't understand what this was until I did some reading and found out that after the Reformation, the Catholic Church created brotherhoods of good works, they called it, and created these kind of membership groups whose mission was to do good things in their communities. And so each one of the brotherhoods or confraternities would have their own church. And this confraternity in Monterosso al Mare was for the purpose of arranging funerals for the poor and people who couldn't afford it, and also caring for widows and orphans, caring for sometimes shipwrecks occurred on the coastline and people died that were strangers. They didn't know what they had, no family, no one knew who they were. And they would provide funerals for those strangers who were shipwrecked. They also took care of families when fishermen were lost at sea, which happened fairly frequently. So these brothers in the Brotherhood of Death and Prayer had a lot of work to do, helping their community by dealing with death and dying and funerals and bereavement, and helping to support and care for widows and orphans and other bereaved people after death. And I have just never heard of such a thing, and I thought it was so lovely and so amazing to see it. And that church became very comforting to me, and the perfect place for a novena, because of the idea that death is ever present. And that's what the church was really telling us. And the decorations I read are designed to remind everyone that life is transient. Be prepared, be ready. Life can come to an end at any time. But also that we as a community, as a brother and sisterhood, can come together and support one another and help each other. And that's really should be all of our missions, to help each other get through the losses that life brings us and learn how to navigate death together. So this little church was just amazing and so powerful, and in some ways a game changer for me. Here I'd been nurtured and nourished by all the nature and by being fully in the present moment. And here arrives the message that death is ever present. Death is waiting for all of us. We all experience it together, and we need to deal with it as a community and help one another. So this was an incredible, powerful experience, seeing this little church. If you ever get a chance to go to Cinque Terre, I highly recommend that you stop in Monterosso al Mare and see this little oratory. The same day, I did more hiking around the town and walked up a lot of steps uphill to the Capuchin Church and Cemetery, which used to be a monastery but no longer occupied. And so I walked through that very, very old cemetery and looked at the old headstones there, although there are still fresh flowers on a lot of the graves. And it was lovely overlooking the sea. Again, everything in the village is so beautiful, with this breathtaking view of the Ligurian Sea in one direction, and then upwards the terraced farming and all the beautiful trees and flowers that are growing there. But inside this small church, the Capuchin Church, there is a painting of the Crucifixion by Anthony van Dyck, the Flemish painter. And so it's kind of the one major piece of artwork, I guess, in Cinque Terre. I don't know. There are probably others. But this depiction of the Crucifixion shows an eclipse of the sun. And so the depiction is at the moment Jesus died, and there was an eclipse that took place. The sun was wiped out, and the whole earth was surrounded by darkness. And so it depicts just the thinnest line of the sun still visible as the eclipse is happening. And it's kind of also a stunning painting that shows again this idea of light and dark. I talked about this before, chiar oscuro, the light that comes in the darkness, but that of course it's dark when we're confronted with death and we experience it and we feel the loss and the pain, of course, we're plunged into darkness. And yet there is light that can be found within the darkness. It might take us a while to get there. We may not experience it right away. We may have to learn to sit in the darkness and even to fumble our way around a little bit in the darkness. But there is light and there is hope. And we will find it eventually. It will come to us eventually. And so this journey, this novena number 5 in Cinque Terre was amazing, a game changer. Oh my gosh, the other thing I wanted to mention is the food there is incredible. And again, these are all stories that I'm writing for my next book that's going to come out, and I will write a lot more about the food experiences that we had along the way. One of them just being the very sweet owner of our hotel made homemade bread for breakfast in the morning and homemade lemon marmalade from the lemon trees in the orchard right outside our room. And she gave us a jar of the marmalade to take with us at the end. And it was this most beautiful symbol of the bitter and the sweet coming together to be poignant, exquisite, delicious, rich, deep, amazing. And that's what this entire stage of this journey was in Cinque Terre. And so I'm going to leave the storytelling there since it's been at the 30 minute mark. And I hope that you'll come back next week and listen to the next episode. But also, if you haven't done so, please do listen to the other episodes so that you can get the full picture here of what went on my amazing trip through Italy while I was grieving. So until we're together the next time, remember that we're here for love. All of this, everything happening around us, is designed to help us learn how to love more deeply, how to fall apart and break apart so that we can discover the deepest love within us. So to do that, to get there, you have to face your fear, be ready for whatever life gives you next, and just enjoy and savor every moment of your very precious life. Bye-bye.